Hello students, today we are going to study the chapter The Address from our book Snapshots. The story is about the human predicament that follows the pre-war and post-war period. Mrs. S, who was a Jewess, was a rich lady, whereas Mrs. Dorling was a non-Jewish. The girl, daughter of Mrs. S, had lost her house and her mother during the war, and now she had decided to come back to take her possessions from Mrs. Dorling, an acquaintance whose address was given by her mother years ago. When she reached the house, the woman treated her with a cold reception and did not let her into the house. She decided to go back anyway, and then she met her daughter, who let her in and told her to wait inside. When she saw all the possessions in front of her, she could not connect with them and decided to leave the house. The protagonist asked the woman standing at the door if she still knew her. The lady had opened the door a little. The protagonist came closer to the door and stood there. The woman responded negatively, and the protagonist still gave her introduction. She said she was Mrs. S.'s daughter. The woman had held the door tightly as she did not want her to enter the house. She kept staring at the protagonist, though she could not recognize her. The protagonist thought maybe she had come to the wrong house. She had seen the woman only for a short time years ago. The woman who answered the door stepped aside and let go of the door. The protagonist recognized her mother's green knitted cardigan that the woman was wearing. The wooden buttons had become pale because of the washing. The woman noticed the protagonist looking at the cardigan she hid behind the door. Now the protagonist knew she had come to the right house. वो जो कार्डिगन उसने पहन रखे थे वो राइटर पहचान जाती है और उसे लगता है कि वो सही एड्रेस पे आई है. The protagonist asked the woman about her mother. The woman asked her if she had come back. She replied only to her, and no one else came with her. The woman opened the door, and a passage was behind her. A stale smell occurred all over. The woman told her that she could not do anything for her. The protagonist told her that she had come from far place on the train just to talk to her. The woman told her it is not convenient to talk right now and asked her to come back later. The woman closed the door as she did not want anyone to get disturbed in the house. The protagonist was still standing on the step. She saw a curtain moving on the window bay. Someone was staring at her from inside the house. She thought it was nothing, as the woman would have told her. The protagonist looked at the number plate again. It said number 46. Darling was written on the plate on white enamel. As she was going back to the station, she was thinking about her mother, who gave her the address. It was the first half of the war. She was home for a few days, and suddenly it struck her that the room was different now. Various things were missing. Her mother was surprised that she noticed the change a little later. It was that time when she told her about this woman, Mrs. Dorling. She was an old contact of hers whom she hadn't seen for years. Suddenly, she came to visit her, and since then, they had been in regular contact. राइटर स्टेशन जाते समय वो अपने मम्मी को याद करती है। वो टाइम याद करती है कब का, वर्ल्ड वार से पहले का टाइम है, फर्स्ट हाफ जो टाइम है उसका। और वहाँ से उसको याद आता है कि वो जो एक बार घर पे गई हुई है और कुछ दिन बाद नोटिस करती है कि घर के कुछ सामान क्या है वहाँ से मिसिंग है। तो उसकी मम्मी को सरप्राइज होता है कि वो काफ़ी लेट से इस चीज़ को नोटिस कर पाई, और तब वो मिसेस डॉर्लिंग के बारे में उसको बताती हैं। Her mother told her that whenever that woman came to visit her, she took something from the house with her, table silvers, antique plates, and she had trouble over carrying the large vase. She told her that the cramp in her back came from the crockery. Her mother shook her head in sorrow. The woman kept telling the protagonist's mother that she wanted to save her precious things. If they had to leave the place someday, they would lose everything. She asked her mother if she really wanted her to take all the things with her. Her mother replied that even if she didn't, it would be an insult to ask her not to. She was going out with a risk herself, a suitcase full of items. राइटर अपनी मम्मी से पूछती है क्या वो वाकई में चाहती हैं कि मिसेस डॉर्लिंग उनके सारे सामान को ले जाए। उसकी मम्मी कहती है कि अगर वो नहीं भी चाहती हैं तो ये इंसल्ट होगा उसको पूछना कि वो ना ले जाए, उसको मना करना क्या होगा, इट्स लाइक अ इंसल्ट टू हर, क्योंकि वो हर बार रिस्क लेके सारा सामान उनका लेके जाती है। Her mother noticed that she wasn't convinced and looked at her critically. After that day, they never talked about the incident again. She reached the station without noticing any details on the way. She passed the familiar things after the war for the first time. She did not want to upset herself with the familiar sights of houses and streets that reminded her of all the precious time. स्टेशन वापस जाते समय वो रास्ते में किसी भी चीज़ को नोटिस नहीं करती है, मीन्स शी डिड नॉट पे एनी अटेंशन, वो चाहे घर हो चाहे गलियाँ हो, बिकॉज उन यादों से वो अपने आप को डिस्टर्ब नहीं करना चाहती है। Back in the time, she saw Mrs. Darling in person a day after her mother told her daughter about her. जब उसकी मम्मी जिस दिन उसको बताती हैं मिसेस डॉर्लिंग के बारे में, उसके एक दिन बाद ही वो मिसेस डॉर्लिंग से मिलती है। She woke up late that morning, and as she was going downstairs, she saw the lady with broad back. Her mother was seeing her out. Her mother introduced the protagonist to the lady. She signaled to her, and the woman responded with a nod. She picked the suitcase under the coat rack. She was wearing a brown coat and a shapeless hat. The protagonist asked her mother if she lived far away. The mother told her the address, Marconi Street, number 46. She remembered it. She remembered the address, but she took too long to visit the place. After the freedom, she was on one hand not interested, and on the other was afraid. She was afraid of getting confronted with the past memories and connections that no longer existed. Connections were hidden in cupboards and boxes. It seems that those memories were waiting in vain to put them back to their places, as they had suffered all these years because they were only things. Things were getting normal in the protagonist's life, but one day she got curious about all the things that were still at that address. She wanted to see them and touch them. After the first hopeless visit, she decided to try one more time. When she reached Mrs. Darling's home, a girl of 15 years opened the door. Protagonist asked her about her mother. She told her that she was outside doing some errands, to which the protagonist decided that she should wait for her. The protagonist followed the girl along the passage. There was a Hanukkah candle holder hung next to a mirror. She remembered that she never used it as it was unmanageable. रास्ते में जो पैसेज से होके जब जा रहे थे तो उसको दिखता है हनुक कैंडल होल्डर, जो पहले के ज़माने में होते थे दीवालों से लगे हुए, और वो बताती है कि वो उसको यूज़ नहीं करती थी बिकॉज वो अनमैनेजेबल था, उसको संभालना काफ़ी मुश्किल काम था. The girl asked her to sit down as she opened the door for the living room. She stopped and she was disturbed. She was standing in a room which she knew and she didn't. She was standing in the middle of things which she did not want to see, and they burdened her. Maybe because of the way things were arranged, or the humid smell in the room, or the ugly furniture, she was scared to look at everything. She sat down on a chair which the girl pulled out for her. She looked at the woolen tablecloth. She rubbed it and her fingers felt warm. As she followed the lines of the pattern, she remembered a burn mark that was never repaired. राइटर्स जब लिविंग रूम में एंटर्ड करती है तो वो काफ़ी डिस्टर्ब्ड हो जाती है और बीच में खड़े होकर देखती है ना. डिस्टर्ब्ड होने के पीछे का रीज़न क्या है कि जो चीज़ें उसको दिखती हैं वो उसकी खुद की हैं और वो ठीक से नहीं रखी गई हैं, अरेंज नहीं है. कमरे में ह्यूमिड स्मेल है, फर्नीचर्स काफ़ी गंदे हैं और वो इन सारी चीज़ों को देख के काफ़ी डर जाती है. फिर वो उस लड़की के द्वारा दी गई एक चेयर पे बैठती है तो उसको वो नीटेड जो टेबल क्लॉथ्स है वो उसको दिखता है, वो उसको टच करती है, फील करती है और सडनली उसको याद आता है कि उसमें एक बर्न मार्क है, जलने से एक निशान बना है और उसे कभी वो ठीक नहीं किया गया था. The girl told her that her mother would be back soon and asked if she would like to have a cup of tea. She answered, "Thank you." The protagonist looked up. She saw the girl put 2 cups of tea in front of her. She had a broad back, just like her mother. She poured tea from the teapot and it had a golden border on the lid. She opened a box and took some spoons out of it. The protagonist complimented the girl about the box. She felt weird hearing her own voice. It was sounding different to her. As the girl turned to give her a cup, she asked if she knew about the box. Then she added that it is antique, according to her mother. She pointed around the room and said that there are more. She told her to see. Although the protagonist did not need to follow her direction, she knew what she was talking about. She glanced over the tea table. She remembered how she used to fancy the apple on the parrot plate. The girl said that they used the plate for everything. Once they ate off the plates that were hanging on the wall. The girl wanted to eat off that played too, but it wasn't anything special. The protagonist but it wasn't anything special. The protagonist found the burn mark on the tablecloth. The girl looked at her in a question. The protagonist said yes and told her that when you are so used to touching things into your house, you hardly notice anything. You only notice when something is missing or it needs to be repaired or because you have lent it. She again found her voice to be unnatural. She continued. She told the girl that once her mother asked her if she would help her polish the silver. It was a long time ago and she was bored that day. She had to stay that day, maybe as she was ill. She asked her mother what silver she is talking about. Her mother said it was the spoons, knives, and forks, but she didn't know that it was silver. The girl laughed and said that she bet she did not know it was either with what they ate with. The protagonist asked if she knew. The girl hesitated and walked to the sideboard and opened a drawer. She said she would see if it was there. The protagonist jumped and said she forgot the time and she had to catch the train. The girl asked her if she did not want to wait for her mother. The protagonist still replied with a no and said she must leave. The girl pulled the drawer open. The protagonist said she could find her way out and walked down the passage as she heard the ringing sound of spoons and forks. When she reached the corner of the road, she looked at the nameplate again. It said Marconi Street and she was standing at 46. The address was correct, but she does not want to remember it anymore. She did not want to go back as the things in there reminded her of memories linked with the familiar life of old times. But they lose the value when you are separated from them and you see them again in a strange environment. She thought of what she would have done with the small rented room where black out paper hung over the window and no cutlery fitted in the narrow drawer. She finally resolved on forgetting the address as it would be easiest. राइटर चीज़ों को देख के उसकी पुरानी मेमोरीज़ को याद नहीं करना चाहती है एंड द सेकेंड थिंग कि वो जो अब रेंटेड हाउस में रहती है वहाँ इतना स्पेस नहीं है कि इन सारी चीज़ों को फिट किया जा सके बिकॉज ऑफ दिस टू रीजंस वो डिसाइड करती है कि वो एड्रेस को क्या करेगी भूल जाएगी और ये सबसे आसान तरीका होगा और ये ही फाइनल रास्ता होगा. सो हियर वी कम टू द एंड ऑफ दिस स्टोरी. थैंक यू.